Hi everyone. Welcome back to Julia's story. Before we begin, tell us where you're watching from in the comments. If you enjoy this video, don't forget to hit like and subscribe. Sit back, relax, and let's get into the story. By 5, my fingers already smelled like wet earth and rosemary. The glass roof above me held the last of the night, a thin gray that made the leaves look brave. I moved between rows of basil and rain lilies, sleeves rolled, knees damp, breath steady in the cool. Sleep had been stingy again. Loneliness visits early when the city is still rubbing its eyes, but soil has a way of making silence feel like company. I am Naya, the gardener people forget until the flowers open and someone needs a photo. My hands are nicked from pruning thorns that do not negotiate. My pockets keep twine, bandages, and lemon candies for the long hours. When the misting system clicked on, a soft hiss rose around me and the air turned to a silver veil. I tasted mint from the tea I had finished too fast, the kind my mother taught me to sweeten with patience more than sugar. The estate sleeps late. Money likes warm mornings. Only the kitchen lights were awake, a rectangle of yellow at the far side of the lawn where the cook hummed old songs and coaxed courage from eggs. I work behind the glass with the plants that do not care who owns them, as long as water arrives the way promises should. He arrived earlier than usual, the millionaire, Elias Hart, sneakers dark with dew, a jacket thrown on like an apology for being human. He always walks the grounds before the market opens, and the day remembers to be cruel. He paused just outside the greenhouse door and lifted a hand. His face carried the kind of tired that has learned to dress well. "You have a way with things that refuse to bloom for anyone else," he said. I told him it is not magic, just listening. He laughed under his breath and stepped inside, hands behind his back the way boys do in museums. We have been a polite orbit for months now. He knows I sing to the seedlings when the wind is bored. I know he brought the gardener who raised him to live on the hill so the old man could watch the lemon trees grow the way he used to. Some names carry rooms inside them. His does. Mine is a path that keeps finding its own light. He took out a small box I recognized from a jeweler on River Street, not the heavy kind, the kind that fits in a closed fist. "Thank you," he said, "for saving the camellias from that fungus last month." No one else noticed the leaves were asking for help. He opened the lid and the greenhouse air shifted color. Inside lay a simple pendant on a thin chain, a tiny pressed sprig of rosemary under glass, green and tender, set in silver that did not want a stage. My throat warmed. No diamonds. No noise. Something that looked like listening. I could not take it. Not then. Not from the man whose name could open doors my shoes were not allowed to scuff. I told him I would keep it safe until I earned the courage to wear thanks that visible. He nodded, the way decent people do when they understand you need time. The box went into my locker behind the potting bench, tucked between seed packets and a folded handkerchief my mother embroidered with small blue stars. The morning went on, slow and clean. We trimmed rosemary to wake the tired air. He told me about his mother's soup that never tasted the same twice and still forgave you for coming home late. I told him about my father's hands, cracked like mine, and the way he could coax life from a stick with 2 leaves. Elias listened, his eyes softened by the act of paying attention. The sun slipped up the glass and turned the mist into scattered pearls. For a few minutes, everything accepted the shape of my breath. By 8, the house woke fully. Footsteps took the stairs with purpose. A car door shut with the quiet of money that has nothing to prove. Somewhere a phone buzzed with hurry, then swallowed it. I wiped the benches, labeled cuttings in my neat hand, and set a bowl of basil by the back door for the cook who always sends a roll down later wrapped in a napkin and kindness. When I reached my locker, the box was where I left it, cool and sure. My fingers shook a little. The greenhouse glass reflected a woman with soil under her nails and a face that has learned not to ask for applause. I lifted the pendant from its bed, and the tiny rosemary glowed the way courage glows when it is small and honest. The chain lay against my skin, light as breath, and for a second my name felt taller in my mouth. I stepped outside with the bowl, and the morning hit me full, the smell of cut grass and engine heat, the kitchen door opening with a squeak that always makes the sparrows laugh. I did not notice the car at first, black and shy, tucked under the jacaranda where the blossoms fall like confetti for weddings that have not been planned. Two men stood by the trunk in jackets that misunderstood weather. The house manager moved toward me with paper in his hand, mouth careful. "Naya," he said, "could you come inside?" The marble foyer swallowed my shoes, made my steps sound smaller than I felt. A woman in a gray suit waited near the coat rack, bracelets delicate, eyes not. Next to her, a guard from a private company tapped a tablet, the kind that logs movements instead of music. The house manager folded the paper until the edges met like teeth. "The gentleman's ruby cufflink is missing," he said, voice even. "The one from the study. It was catalogued last night after the fundraiser. This morning it is not there." The air went thin. I could smell polish and lilies and the faint sweetness of yesterday's drinks. The gray-suited woman lifted her chin. "We will need to check staff lockers," she said, and then she looked at my throat like truth had chosen jewelry. Her gaze paused on the pendant, that small green promise at my collarbone. The room tilted by a spoon's width. My fingers found the chain without meaning to. The guard's thumbs paused above his screen. Someone's breath forgot to land. I stood in the bright foyer, rosemary warm against my skin, the house listening for the wrong answer. The gray-suited woman asked again, her bracelets barely chiming, the way rain warns before it falls. The house manager's mouth lived between sorry and duty. I felt the pendant cool against my skin, rosemary pressed in silver, a small green truth with nowhere to sit. We walked back across the lawn. The greenhouse fogged a little at the corners, morning breath on glass. When I slid my key into the locker, the metal was colder than it should have been. Inside, neat as always, hung my sweater with the loose cuff, a folded handkerchief stitched with blue stars, and the small jeweler's box tucked between seed packets like a sleeping bird. The guard's tablet blinked awake. The woman set a paper evidence sleeve on the bench, its mouth open. Her voice stayed gentle and exact. "We will just look, Naya." I lifted the box with both hands so my fingers would behave. The lid came up on tissue like frost. Empty as it should be, because the pendant was on me. Still, the logo on the velvet read the same elegant River Street name the rich like to pronounce in public. The woman noted the brand, tucked the box into the sleeve, and sealed it with a strip of tape that made a small, final sound. The guard took a photo. Click. Mist turned the light to milk. Behind them, kindness kept trying even if it was bad at timing. The cook slipped in through the potting door and pressed a warm roll into my palm without looking at my face. "Eat," she whispered, like a blessing with crumbs. The houseman straightened a stack of terracotta trays that did not need straightening, then set my pruning shears on the cloth so the metal would not bruise the wood. The old hose coughed once and fell quiet, polite for once. They led me through the service hall into the study, a room that smells like leather learning how to be polite. The display case waited under the window, velvet dark as evening. Inside, pairs of cufflinks sat side by side like tiny, orderly marriages. One space was as empty as a missing tooth. The card said ruby, oval cut, antique setting, family crest under the stone. The light made the emptiness louder. The gray-suited woman tilted her head. "You wore the pendant today. When did you get it?" "This morning," I said, and tasted how dangerous truth can be when it cannot name every part of itself. "A thank you for the camellias." Her eyes moved to Elias Hart's portrait on the far wall, then back to my throat. "From Mr. Hart." I looked at the polished floor because floors do not lie. "From the house," I said, which was also true, small and brave. She did not press, not yet. Her hand held out a linen pad and a smaller bag. "For the record, we need to log the chain." My fingers found the clasp by muscle memory. The pendant slid into my palm, light as breath, the glass warming fast. The chain pooled like quicksilver. Without it, my collarbone felt suddenly naked, as if someone had moved the sun. I laid it on the linen. The woman leaned close. Tiny letters were etched on the rim of the silver, so fine you could mistake them for a trick of light. She squinted. The guard bent a little. The house manager looked away, as if giving privacy to letters that were not his. "What does that say?" she asked softly. Her question climbed into my throat and waited. The room smelled of lilies, polish, old paper. The clock on the mantel ticked like a careful heart. My own heart did not like being timed. From the doorway, footsteps changed the air, not the sharp march of uniform, something slower, heavier, familiar. The study felt smaller by a breath. The gray-suited woman straightened, eyes flicking past my shoulder. The guard's tablet dimmed and brightened. Outside, somewhere between lemon tree and gravel, a bird called once, urgent and sweet, like a string plucked and left humming. I kept my eyes on the pendant as the shadow of a man fell across the case, and the empty velvet answered by getting darker. The shadow belonged to Elias. Dew still clung to his cuffs, the good kind of proof that a man had walked the lawn before words started fighting. The study smelled of lilies, leather, and something colder hiding under the polish. He glanced at the empty velvet square, then at my hand hovering over the pendant like a small roof. "That was my gift," he said, voice low enough to keep the room from snapping. He did not ask for permission to step closer. He waited for my eyes. When I nodded, he bent a little, gentleman to gardener, and read the tiny letters cut into the silver rim. "For Naya. Keep listening. E.H." My name looked shy there, but sure. The gray-suited woman, who had introduced herself as Ms. Vance with a kind of handshake that files things neatly, cleared her throat. "Thank you, Mr. Hart. The pendant is logged. The cufflink, however, is not." She set the linen pad nearer the light. The rosemary under glass reflected the window, a white square inside a green world. Outside, a jacaranda blossom let go and drifted past the pane like a small purple sail. I thought of my mother murmuring that falling is not proof of failure, only gravity doing its job. Elias nodded to the case. "May I?" he asked, and the house manager handed him a key that knew old corridors. The lock turned with a click like a shoulder popping back into place. Inside, pairs of cufflinks gleamed in quiet marriages. On the empty spot, a faint oval of dust told the story better than any speech. Something had been there and was gone. Ms. Vance tapped her tablet. Inventory shows the ruby pair was logged at 11 last night after the fundraiser. "You were in the study then, Mr. Hart. So were 2 board members and a string quartet on break. Staff access was restricted. I remembered last night in pieces. My watering can cooling on its hook. Music drifting out to the lemon trees like a polite promise. A burst of laughter near the study door, cut short. A clatter so quick my brain had filed it as ice settling in a glass. Small sounds do not get to make announcements in houses this size. They ask permission to exist." Elias kept his eyes on the velvet. When he spoke, it was to the room, not to rank. "We can search, but start with the parts of the house that catch what falls." He looked at me as if the sentence had been written for the greenhouse long before this morning. "Drains. Grates. The mouth of the old heating vent." Ms. Vance nodded once, efficient, but her gaze still weighed the silver at my throat as if gratitude could be counterfeit. The guard lifted his tablet again. The house manager adjusted a bell pull that had not been used in a decade, as if tidiness could make truth hurry. I asked softly if I could put the pendant back on. Ms. Vance considered a beat, then held out the linen. Elias steadied the chain while my fingers found the clasp. The metal warmed fast against my collarbone, the rosemary settling where a pulse lives. That small weight steadied the air around me. My name climbed back into my mouth and sat down. "Take me through your morning," Ms. Vance said. "Start at 5. No poetry, please. Just steps, doors, times." We walked the route together, past the pantry humming like a fat cat, past the boot room with its rows of polished pride, out to the lawn where dew made the grass a field of lost stars. The greenhouse roof held a haze of light, glass freckled with mist. Inside, the breath of the place wrapped me in herb and soil and the clean bite of wet metal. I told it all. The basil clipped and labeled. The rosemary trimmed. Elias stopping by with a box I tucked into the locker. The cook slipping in with her roll, still warm enough to make my palm a small stove. The misting system stuttering once, coughing like an old man who refuses to stop working. Me rinsing the snips, letting the water run so the metal would not stain and the blades would forgive my morning haste. "Say that again," Ms. Vance said. "Where did you rinse?" I pointed to the deep sink by the potting bench, its lip polished by buckets, its drain a dark mouth ringed by a grate my father would have called honest. The old pipe beneath it rattles when the water first hits, like coins in a jar. I turned the knob and the tap coughed to life. A thin stream laced through dirt and fell in steady music. The guard crouched beside the trap. He flicked his light and the grate threw back a dull promise. Ms. Vance leaned in. A line of water carried something small and bright against the metal and let it go. A memory rose with it, sharp and clear, a tiny clink I had ignored at dawn, swallowed by mist and habit. Elias knelt without waiting to be asked. He pressed his ear close, a man learning to listen to his own house in a new tongue. The pipe answered with a faint metallic chime, too pure for gravel, too soft for tools. He looked up at Ms. Vance, then at me. "It sounds like a swallowed jewel," he said. The greenhouse went quiet enough to hear the steam lift off my tea mug. Ms. Vance's bracelets stopped their polite conversation. The guard set his tablet down, as if a screen could only get in the way of this kind of truth. The house manager reached for the grate and then thought better of it, hesitating the distance between blame and repair. My palms remembered my father's hands teaching me how to twist a rusted collar, how to ask a stubborn bolt to consider mercy, how to make old metal trust my grip. I set my fingers where his ghost would have set his, cool and sure, and breathed once. The pipe in the wall hummed in answer like something relieved to be noticed. "Do you have a wrench?" I asked, voice steady. The house manager blinked as if woken from a polite dream, then hurried to the shed. Ms. Vance stepped back to give me room. Elias stayed where he was, eyes on the dark mouth of the drain, jaw quiet. Outside, a jacaranda blossom let go and kissed the glass. The house seemed to lean in a fraction, a building remembering that it was made of screws and breath, not myth. The old pipe sang again, brighter now, as if metal were choosing to tell a secret in daylight. The house manager came back at a small run with a wrench that remembered other thickets of trouble. He handed it to me like a person passing a candle in the wind. My fingers found the bite of the metal, and for a second I saw my father under the mango tree, telling me that old pipes behave for people who speak to them like family. I slid onto the cool floor. The concrete smelled of moss and last year's rain. When the wrench met the collar, the metal protested, then sighed, that tired music of a thing finally understood. Ms. Vance knelt, bracelets quiet. Elias kept his eyes on the drain as if listening could thread a needle. A quarter turn. Another. The trap loosened. A ribbon of water unspooled down my wrist, bright as winter. It carried the greenhouse on its breath, rosemary, clay, the clean iron of honesty. I cupped my palm under the curve and lowered the pipe. The grate made a soft click, like a tiny door giving up its secret. Something red winked in the wet. Not shout red. Heart red. A glint that caught the sun and threw it back as if to say I did not come here to die. I set the trap on the bench cloth the cook had laid down without being asked. We all leaned in. There it was, nestled in a crescent of grit and one brave root, oval stone deep as pomegranate, its antique setting holding a crest that had learned to keep its own counsel. A ruby cufflink, small and certain, blinking like a lighthouse under milk water. No one spoke. The guard let out a breath he pretended he had been holding for the tablet's sake. Ms. Vance lifted the piece with tweezers, gentle, and turned it in the light. Clay stained the hinge. A thread clung to the prong, delicate and stubborn, the color of jacaranda after rain. She set it on the linen, and the greenhouse exhaled with us. "It is the missing one," she said, voice even, but her eyes had softened by a thumb's width. The crest matched the card in the study. The ruby was nicked at the edge, the kind of bruise a drain gives when it greets a jewel without warning. "How did it reach the sink?" she asked, not to trap me, to map the morning. I felt the question like a cool hand on the back of the neck. I looked at my palms. Soil lived in the creases even after washing, proof of a life spent persuading stubborn green to keep its promises. Last night after the fundraiser, I said, people drifted past the lemon trees to breathe where the air knows how to be kind. Someone brought a bowl of river stones from the decor table to my bench. The white ones. They were sticky with spilled wine, and I could not leave them to sour. I rinsed them and left them to dry. I heard a clink, small as a coin deciding to be honest. I did not think it belonged to a story like this. Ms. Vance nodded, the motion of a person moving a pin on an invisible board. She lifted the cufflink again and sniffed it once, an old habit probably, the way cooks can tell a soup by its steam. Her brow warmed. "Rosemary oil," she said. "Clay." A whisper of citrus. Her gaze flicked to my sink, to the lemon tree shadow on the glass, to the rosemary I had trimmed with my morning hum. This was here. Elias looked at my face, not the jewel. His mouth held a relief he did not let swagger. He said thank you to the drain, to the wrench, to my father's ghost, and then to me, as if each needed the same weight. The ruby had answered where, but not who. Whose cuff it had left. Whose hand had laughed at the study door, knocked something small, let it go. The thread clinging to the prong was the only voice left, a thin violet whisper. It matched a memory I did not like, a shape moving past the greenhouse door when the quartet took their break. A woman in a shawl the color of jacaranda had stood close to the basil and stroked its small leaves with 2 fingers the way people do who think plants are props. She had laughed too brightly, then reached for the river stones, saying that white deserves white, and dropped one into her pocket like a trick. I had said nothing because staff swallow small warnings when the night is dressed in charity. Now the thread tugged my silence gently by the sleeve. Ms. Vance sealed the cufflink in a sleeve and wrote the time. The guard photographed the trap, the grit, the little root, the wet half-moon on the cloth, every humble witness. The house manager took the wrench like a person receiving a tired child and wiped it as if thanks had a rag. We carried the water story back to the study. The case looked less sure of itself. The empty velvet waited like an apology that had not learned grammar. Ms. Vance slid the recovered piece into an evidence box. She did not put it home. Not yet. She turned to me. "You will keep the pendant on," she said. The words were not a favor. They were a line drawn with a steady hand. Her gaze moved to the tiny inscription again, to the rosemary under glass, to the way the chain lay over my pulse like a promise that had survived the morning. The millionaire's portrait, hung large on the wall, looked less like a throne and more like a man remembering a garden where a boy had learned to listen. Elias stood beneath it, real enough to blur the paint. He watched Ms. Vance without trying to own the room. He had learned something in the mist that wealth often misses. We reached the foyer and the house paused. Marble held the words for us like a careful plate. Ms. Vance's phone lit, then blinked dark. She touched her earpiece, listened, and her face changed by a shade you only learn if you have studied weather. She looked at me and then at Elias. "The external cameras do not cover the lawn by the jacaranda," she said, but the catering truck dashcam caught a sliver of last night at 10:59. A woman in a violet shawl crossed from the study porch to the greenhouse with a glass in her hand and a white bowl under her arm. The film is grainy. Her heel catches on the path. She steadies herself on the potting bench. Her bracelet flashes. Then she is gone. Her words landed like rain on tin, bright and fast. The house manager looked at the lilies as if they could give a name. The guard's tablet woke up hungry. Elias's jaw eased with a thought I could not yet read. Ms. Vance slid her phone into her pocket and lifted her chin. She had the look of someone who would be kind to the truth even if it refused to be polite. The doorbell rang, a soft insistence that sounded like the past arriving with its paperwork in order. The butler moved to answer. His glove brushed the brass and the step outside filled with a hush. On the brick, heels tapped, careful. The scent of violets rose against the lemon and lilies. A shape stitched itself out of shadow, shawl draped like a purple cloud learning how to be tame. The woman paused at the threshold and raised her face to the light. It was the same face that had floated between the river stones and the basil, the same mouth that had laughed too brightly into night air. Her eyes scanned the foyer and found the cufflinks box on Miss Vance's palm, the pendant at my throat, the millionaire standing with his hands honest at his sides. She smoothed the shawl with fingers that did not shake. "I have come to return a bowl," she said. Her voice was clean and trained. She held up the white dish like a mercy held at arm's length. Some truths do not need doors to be opened for them. They walk in on their own feet. Up close she smelled like violets and last night, a sweetness that tries to behave. The white bowl shone in her hands, too clean, the way a story gets polished before it knocks. Steam did not rise, but the ceramic still kept a kind of warmth, the ghost of water that had done work. "I am returning this," she said, chin set as if the sentence had been rehearsed. Her shawl was the same violet I remembered from the path, soft and heavy, one tassel a little tired. A silver bracelet slept at her wrist, delicate chains like moonlight trying to hold. Ms. Vance did not make her reach the threshold. She stepped forward and took the bowl with two hands, a small act that lowers the temperature of a room. "Thank you," she said. "May I?" The woman nodded, careless and careful at once. Ms. Vance tilted the bowl. A thin scent rose that the lilies could not hide. Rosemary, lemon, clay. The same morning that lived on my skin. In the curve of the dish, a small crescent of grit had settled, one riverstone flake stuck where a thumb would steady. A red speck clung to the lip, wax from the fundraiser menu seals, the kind the staff peeled off with nails after midnight. "Where did you find it?" Ms. Vance asked, voice that never forgets to be kind. "On the study porch," she said, eyes sliding to the portrait behind us and back. "Someone must have left it with the caterers. I like to be helpful." Elias stood quiet, hands open, like he had learned something about silence in a greenhouse. The guard's tablet pulsed with a message. He did not read it yet. The house manager stared at the floor tile as if it could offer a name. The woman's gaze fell to my collarbone. The pendant sat where breath meets skin, rosemary pressed under glass, silver rim catching foyer light. Her mouth parted a fraction. "That is from River Street," she said, tone dressed in casual. "A limited run. I looked at one in the window last month." "It was a thank you," I said, small voice steady. She smiled without heat, then lifted her shawl to smooth the edge. The tassel brushed my shoulder. A loose violet thread floated in the air between us like a tiny flag that forgot its pole. I felt the brush before I saw it, the whisper tug of fiber against metal. The clasp of my chain caught the thread and held. Not hard. Just the way a memory holds a wrist when it does not want the person to leave too quickly. I breathed. The thread made a fine purple line from her shawl to my throat, a drawn sentence without words. Her hand froze in the air where the bowl had been. For one beat you could hear the clock in the hall count a single second and mean it. "I am so clumsy," she said, too light, reaching to free the fiber. Her bracelet flashed, and in the bright I saw a tiny nick on one link, the kind a prong would make when it meets resistance. Ms. Vance's eyes found it too and did not look away. "Let me," I murmured, and lifted the chain from my skin with my thumb. The thread slid free, soft as breath, and clung to the clasp like a child who had not yet decided to be brave. Ms. Vance opened a small paper sleeve and I laid the fiber inside. It weighed nothing, and it changed the room. The guard finally read his message. Dashcam confirmed, he said, eyes steady on Ms. Vance. 10:59. A woman in violet with a bowl at the greenhouse door. The woman's chin went up, a little. People love to read coincidence as guilt, she said. I spilled wine. I rinsed a bowl. I returned it. If the house wants to turn courtesy into a trial, I can call my husband. No one asked for his name. The lilies kept breathing. The marble kept time. Elias looked at the bowl, not her. He lifted his eyes to Ms. Vance and waited the way good men wait when they are trying not to swing open doors that are not theirs. Ms. Vance did not raise her voice. She set the bowl, the sleeve with the thread, and the evidence box for the ruby in a tidy row on the console, each item with space to breathe. She turned to the woman and spoke like a person reading a grocery list so the soup won't be wrong. You crossed from the study to the greenhouse. Your shawl snagged. A cufflink fell. It rode the water into the trap. She glanced at me, then back. What I need now is the name of the chair you sat in by the study door, and the name of the person who laughed when the clink was too small for charity. The woman's eyes flashed something private and vanished it. She lifted her hand to her hair. The bracelet's nick caught the light again, a tiny sharp moon. She said, I do not recall. The house manager looked at his shoes because shoes always tell the truth. The guard's tablet buzzed again with a still frame that would try to make memory behave. Elias took one breath and let it go. He was not the center of the moment, and he knew it. The woman turned to me, as if I were the softest door in a corridor of closed ones. For what it is worth, she said, that pendant suits you. Green belongs to hands like yours. Her mouth meant it and did not. She gathered the shawl, careful now, the tassels tucking themselves into obedience. She lifted her chin to go. Wait, please, Ms. Vance said, and her bracelets made a small sound that felt like weather changing. She stepped aside and gestured to the path that led back to the greenhouse. One more look at the drain, together. She said together in a way that left no room for argument. Courtesy can be a key that opens heavier doors. We walked, a curious parade, past the pantry hum, under the lemon scent. The violet thread in the sleeve was a quiet passenger in Ms. Vance's pocket. The grass jeweled our shoes. A jacaranda blossom let go and landed on the woman's shoulder like a memory insisting. She flicked it off with 2 fingers, tidy, a flash of annoyance finally allowed to show. Inside the greenhouse the air changed species. Soil lifted its chin. Rosemary made a small, forgiving choir in the heat. The sink waited, old and honest, mouth that had swallowed and then confessed. Ms. Vance set the bowl under the tap and turned the water on. It struck the ceramic and echoed a sound I had heard before dawn, the smallest clink underneath the rush, a jewel saying I am still here. The woman closed her eyes for the length of one breath, then opened them on a smile that had learned expensive weather. She said it proves nothing and everything at once. Elias stood at the door with the dew still drying on his cuffs. He did not take center. He watched my hands, the way I held the wrench, the way I touched the pipe like family. His gaze dropped once more to the pendant, the tiny rosemary pressed under glass, the soft glow it made on my collarbone. Truth sat there without raising its voice. Ms. Vance's phone hummed. She glanced at the display and nodded to herself. A name, a timestamp, a still image, the kind that makes a paper decide to behave. She slid the phone back and looked at the woman with the violet shawl. We will go back to the study, she said. We will write it down. We will let the house breathe. The woman lifted her chin, composed as a balcony. She stepped past me, and the shawl brushed my arm once more. No thread came loose this time. No sound announced mercy. The only note was the rosemary in the air and the small weight of silver at my throat. As we crossed the lawn, the old man up on the hill opened his window to the lemon trees. He coughed once and laughed, the way men laugh when winter finally gives them a thin blue morning. The jacaranda dropped another petal that caught sunlight and held it for a second longer than it should. Back in the foyer, the study door breathed open like a chest that had been waiting too long to exhale. Ms. Vance moved to the console where the neat row waited like a sentence missing its last word. And before anyone could speak, the front gate bell rang, deep and clean, not a reporter, not a delivery, a bell you answer when the past decides to arrive on time. The bell at the front gate sounded once, low and sure, the kind of note that asks a house to behave. The butler opened to a man in a charcoal coat cut quiet, rain still in the thread. His cuff showed a pale gap where a jewel should have lived. He carried himself like a name people make room for at tables. "Good morning," he said, and the air in the foyer tucked in its shirt. His eyes found the violet shawl, then the evidence box on the console, then the rosemary at my collarbone. He did not look surprised. He looked late to something. "I came about a cufflink," he said. The woman in the shawl did not flinch. She wrapped the fabric closer, as if warmth could rewrite a night. Her voice tried for light. "I returned a bowl." Ms. Vance stepped half a pace between them, not a wall, a hinge. "Sir," she said, calm as steam, "we are clearing a small confusion with clean steps. If you will come to the study, we can all see the same page." We moved, a slow procession past lilies and lemon, the marble echoing little truths underfoot. In the study, the window gave us sober light. The man set his palm on the edge of the desk and leaned, not to tower, to keep standing. His wrist bone showed under the crisp sleeve, a little ridge of human where titles do not reach. He glanced at Elias as men look at each other when money has taught them to keep their voices at museum volume. Then he turned to Ms. Vance. "My wife was kind," he said. "She brought a dish back to the caterers. Charity nights are clumsy by nature. I do hope we are not taxing grace." "Kindness is not taxed," Ms. Vance said. "It is recorded." She opened the small row she had arranged on the console, evidence wrapped in quiet. The sleeve with the violet thread. The ruby in its plastic nest, still wearing the thin crescent of clay. The white bowl that smelled faintly of rosemary, and the river stones we had cleaned when the night was louder than it needed to be. The man's throat moved. He touched his bare cuff, and for a second the gesture did not belong to a trustee or a patron, just to a person who had lost something small and expensive and might be embarrassed to have it found. His gaze lifted and met the shawl's color where it draped over the woman's shoulder. She watched him watching her. The room did not blink. "I rinsed a bowl," she said. "The path was damp. I steadied myself. There was a sound like a coin. No one saw." The bowl was still in my hands when the quartet started again, and it seemed ungracious to interrupt. "I thought it could not matter. I intended to tell you." She lifted her chin as if daring the air to argue with intention. "Intention does not dry wet metal." My father would say that, gently, with his hand already on the wrench. The memory warmed my fingers. The pendant at my throat pulsed with my breath. Rosemary under glass, small stubborn proof that someone had listened before the room needed to be persuaded. Ms. Vance did not say gotcha. She set a linen pad on the desk and placed the recovered ruby at its center. The man's eyes softened a shade you do not get by practicing in a mirror. He reached but did not touch. He spoke like a person asking a tired elevator to try one more floor. "We will make it right," he said. He looked at me then, straight. "And we will say sorry where it belongs." The woman's mouth tightened, not with cruelty, with fear shaped like manners. Her gaze fell to my pendant again and snagged there. "It suits her," she said, and for the first time it sounded unpracticed. "Green should live on skin that has learned the names of plants without needing labels." "Thank you," I said, because truth is easier to carry when you balance it with something small and honest. The room loosened a button. Elias stepped forward only as far as respect allowed. The rosemary pendant caught the window and sent back a thin, clean light. He did not take the moment for himself. He only said one sentence the room could survive. Naya kept the house from lying to itself this morning. My cheeks warmed. The study smelled suddenly less of lilies and more of paper that had decided to be useful. The guard photographed the cufflink on linen. The house manager wrote a time. The clock ticked the way a clock should, steady, not smug. We were not done. The ruby had come home, but the story asked for a signature where apology could enter and be fed. The man in the charcoal coat understood. He turned to Ms. Vance. Draft the note, he said. Public. Clear. No names of staff, only ours. He hesitated one heartbeat, then added wages, a donation to the greenhouse, and the old drains. Replace them. They have done their faithful time. A corner of Ms. Vance's mouth lifted, not victory, relief given permission. The woman in the shawl stared at the window and swallowed. I saw the fight leave her shoulders inch by stubborn inch. She folded the violet tighter, then looser, as if learning a new way to wear herself. It would have been clean to end there, to shelve the day with tidy labels. But houses that breathe do not like abrupt endings. The old gardener from the hill shuffled in just then, cardigan smelling of camphor and lemon leaves. He had a sieve in one hand and dirt under his nails, a prince in another country. Left this by the lemon bed, he said, holding up the second cufflink, the twin, Clay wearing it like a shy coat. Must have jumped when the bowl did. Or when a heart forgot its pocket. The man in the charcoal coat laughed once, soft, the sound of a tight thread letting go. He looked smaller and more human in the good way. He took the twin as if it were a child brought home late. His wife's lip trembled, then steadied. She reached for the old gardener's hand instead of the door. Thank you, she said, and it had the weight of someone who has not used the word correctly in a while and is glad to find it still fits. We all stood there, a crooked circle around a problem that had remembered how to be solved. The lilies breathed. The lemon scent found its courage. The jacaranda outside let go of one more petal, and it fell like a slow note at the end of a song that knows better than to shout. Ms. Vance closed her tablet and chose a pen. Some days need ink. She wrote a few lines, then slid the paper to the man. He signed with a hand that did not hide its shake. The woman added her name, letters careful, dignity deciding to travel light. This is not a court, Ms. Vance said gently. It is a house finding its balance. She turned to me. Naya, take your lunch on the East Terrace today. The sun will behave and the rosemary likes company. Elias smiled with his eyes, not his mouth, and stepped out of the center again so the day could belong to work. The house manager exhaled as if someone had put a chair under his bones. The guard tucked his tablet away like a tool that had done its job and earned its nap. I walked back to the greenhouse through light that had remembered how to be kind. The pendant warmed, rosemary pressed to my skin, small green truth where a pulse lives. The sink was clean and the trap sat reassembled, old metal content as a grandparent after soup. On the bench the cook had left me a roll and a note that read "Eat slowly" in her tidy script. I tore the bread and let butter melt its good work without hurry. Outside, the lemon tree lifted its leaves to the hour. Somewhere beyond the hibiscus, the city sighed the way a tired chest sighs when it realizes it will get to rest after all. We had not climbed a mountain. We had moved a stone and watched a door swing both ways without slamming. I thought of my father's hands on old pipes, of my mother's voice on long lines, of a boy learning to be a man by listening in a room full of glass. The afternoon settled. The misting system hissed its silver veil. And just as I took the first slow bite of bread on the East Terrace, a shadow cooled the doorway and a voice I did not expect spoke my full name like a leaf unfolded right there in my ribs. Naya Devika, the voice said, careful on each syllable like laying seeds one by one into good soil. Elias stood in the doorway, sun at his shoulder, a letter in his hand folded sharp as a new leaf. The greenhouse held its breath with me. Rosemary leaned into the heat, the pendant at my collarbone warming as if it knew my name had been honored out loud. May I sit? He asked. He did not cross until I nodded. He took the low stool by the potting bench, not the tall chair, knees creaking in a way that tells the truth about a life lived in long days. The letter carried the faint scent of lilies and ink. He set it on the workboard between us like bread meant to be broken. "It is from the house, the board, and the two who signed the night wrong," he said. He tapped the top edge with one finger. Ms. Vance insisted on ink. Some things have to be said where the paper can hold their weight. I wiped my hands on my apron and unfolded the page. The words were clean. An apology without lace. They would make it public. No staff names, only their own. The house would replace the old drains and fund the greenhouse for a year beyond budget. There was a stipend for community training, weekends open to neighborhood children who wanted to learn how soil forgives. At the bottom was a line that made my palm go still. "Would you consider leading it?" The misting system clicked on and the silver veil rose again, tiny beads catching light like notes hung on a wire. My mouth went dry and then remembered water. I looked at Elias. His hands were quiet on his knees, a man trying not to stand in the middle of someone else's moment. "Say no if no lives in you," he said. "We will still print the rest." I thought of the flower boy from Soul Street with his stubborn daisies. The night guard who counts quiet hours like coins. The baker's niece who reads bus schedules like poems. I thought of my mother's tea cooled by the kitchen window, and my father's laugh under the mango tree when a rusted pipe finally said yes. I lifted the pendant with 2 fingers and let it fall back against my skin, rosemary under glass, pressed but not silenced. I said I would lead if I could do it with my hands in the dirt more than on a lectern. If Saturdays belonged to children with unbrushed hair and questions, and if the first lesson was that listening makes things grow. Elias nodded like a man relieved to be told how to help. He slid a second paper across, smaller, hand-cut, the edge a little crooked in a way I trusted. A note in his mother's script. "Thank you for noticing what the house tried to forget." It was wrapped around a cloth packet with 2 metal tags inside, old greenhouse keys that had spent years on a hook no one reached. He smiled. "She said they belong in your pocket more than in a drawer." We took the long path back to the east terrace because some decisions need sky. Lemon warmed the air until it tasted like clean courage. The cook waved her spoon from the kitchen door and set another roll on the sill to cool, butter softening on its own timetable. On the gravel, the old gardener from the hill walked slow with his sieve, a prince passing through his small country. He saw the keys in my hand and gave a nod that meant welcome home. By noon 3 staff sat on the low wall to eat. I taught them how to pinch basil without bruising, the trick of leaning the wrist so leaves forgive you. We talked about drains and wages and the way a day can tilt back toward decent by the width of a spoon. The footman with the shaky pour practiced twisting a hose collar without fear. The night guard sent a photo of his twins grinning at the scholarship letter tacked to their wall with tape the color of hope. When the sun leaned west, a girl in a school sweater hovered by the gate, fingers hooked in the wire like a sparrow testing a perch. I waved her in. She moved shy and quick, breathless, eyes on the rosemary as if it could teach her to remember. "Can I help?" she whispered. I gave her the small clay pot I keep for first times, pressed a seed into her palm, and said patience is water you can carry without spilling if you walk slow. I wore the pendant while we worked, not as a trophy, as a reminder. Green under glass. A promise that tiny things can stay themselves and still be seen. When the girl left, she looked taller by the height of a leaf. Evening slid its cool hand along the glass. I sat on the step with my bread and listened to the greenhouse breathe. Every sound meant something now. The old pipe hummed content. The new keys in my pocket chimed when I shifted, a small music made of earned trust. Elias passed by once more, waved without stopping, sleeves rolled, feet dusty, the kind of rich that may yet remember how to be useful. I can offer only this simple moral, soft as soil on the palm. Small truths have strong roots. A kindness done quietly can tilt a day back toward honest. When fear says hide, let your steady work and your steady name stand in the light and invite gentle eyes to see. If your life feels heavy and your pockets hold only lemon candies and twine, hold them anyway. Walk slow. Listen for the note only you can hear in the old pipes of your world. Hope grows where hands keep choosing the good, even when no one is clapping. By the next Saturday, the greenhouse had a new sound. The old gurgle of tired pipes was gone, replaced by a low-content hum that made seedlings stand taller. Fresh drains shone like quiet silver under the sink. When the mist rose, it carried only rosemary and damp clay, not the metallic ache of yesterday. Children arrived in twos and threes, shoelaces loose, eyes wide, hands already open. We wrote their names on wooden sticks and pressed them into trays. I showed them how to pinch basil without bruising and how to lean in to hear when a small stem asks for water. The smallest girl stood on a crate to see into the lemon pot and whispered hello the way people whisper to babies who have just learned their names. The house kept its word with ink, and then with habits. The notice about wages stayed pinned where sun could find it. The cook left a tray of buns on the east terrace, wrapped in clean cloth, steam lifting like morning birds. The night guard walked through on his break and pointed out a spider web that had caught light like lace. He smiled and said the twins had taped their letters by the door so they would see them on the way to school and on the way home. Ms. Vance stopped by with a box of clean gloves and a small jar of balm for hands. She walked the edge of the bed slow, reading the signs, making notes that smelled like change that had decided to learn names. At the door, she pressed a folded card into my palm. It was the final print of the apology, clear sentences that did not bargain. The house manager had added a line about the drains and circled it in pencil, a private grin tucked under neat letters. Around noon, a violet shadow touched the gravel. The woman with the shawl paused at the gate and waited until I looked up to lift her hand. She had left the thread behind and chosen softer colors. In her basket lay seed packets and 2 small trowels with blue wooden handles. She set them down by the pots and kept her voice quiet. "For the children," she said. I nodded. She breathed and left without asking to be seen. Elias came late, sleeves rolled, damp hair telling on him. He carried a crate of glass jars with paper lids and string. His mother had written lemon and rosemary syrup on the labels in careful strokes. He placed the crate on the low table as if setting down a living thing. He did not stay long. Money can learn to visit without taking a chair. As he left, he touched the doorframe the way some men touch a shoulder that has carried them when they could not carry themselves. In the afternoon heat, the girl in the school sweater returned with a friend who had never planted anything before. They chose radish seeds because radishes forgive beginners. We counted together. We pressed the dirt, firm enough to protect, not so firm that hope could not climb. When they finished, they sat on the step and ate buns with butter that melted without hurry. Crumbs stuck to their cheeks like small glitter the world had no right to tax. The old gardener from the hill shuffled in near closing, cardigan smelling of lemon leaves and camphor. He watched the children wash their hands, backs of fingers first the way nurses teach, then rinsed his own palms under the new water as if blessing it. He told a story about a year when rain refused to arrive until a woman sang to the ground, and when she finished, the first drop hit her shoulder like a small yes. The children listened with the kind of stillness that does not come from rules. At dusk, the glass roof caught a soft pink and gave it back to the beds. I walked the rows with a watering can heavier than it looked and felt none of the weight. The pendant lay warm against my skin, rosemary under glass, patient and sure. When I leaned over the basil, the chain made a small sound that reminded me of keys and the pockets where they now live. On my way out, I passed the study. The case sat with both rubies home, not proud, just right. A note under the velvet named the old drains and thanked the hands that had kept them honest for years longer than expected. In the foyer, the lilies smelled less like ceremony and more like a house deciding it prefers light work to heavy cover. I walked to the bus with soil on my sleeves and bread in a paper bag for my mother. The city felt less sharp, as if the corners had been sanded by a day of decent choices. A breeze brought lemon and women laughing 2 streets over. Somewhere a boy practiced the same soccer trick until his heel did what his mind asked. There is no grand ending here, only steady work and the kind of hope that does not need a stage. A pipe that no longer lies. A house that remembers to say sorry with receipts. A seed in a palm learning the shape of patience. If today feels heavy, may your steps be small and honest. May your pockets hold whatever simple things keep you brave, even if it is only twine and a candy that tastes like sunshine. And when you feel alone, lean toward the sound your world makes when it is ready to tell the truth. Rosemary remembers. So do hands.